How's it going? This is UrbanLink Media. We're going to be talking to Shane Hall, learning a little bit about him and his past and how he got where he is today as an entrepreneur. All right, Shane, how you doing, bud?
Great, dude. How you doing?
Good, man. I really love co-hosting with you. It's been a lot of fun.
Dude, it's stimulating.
I agree. So, Shane, we've had a lot of opportunities to talk, and obviously we've had some guests on our interviews, but we really haven't done any with just the two of us.
Yeah.
So we're going to be diving into a handful of those because I think it's a lot of fun. But the biggest thing that I really want to do is dive into you and talk about you and the context of your career. And then, I'll give you some insights to mine and we'll kind of go from there. We'll rap about it. Is that cool?
Yeah, well, that's been interesting how we connected and how our stories and paths have aligned in some ways and been completely diverse in others.
Yeah, and it's funny. We've already kind of covered some of that on some of the previous ones that we've done. And it's been really great because I feel like there's a lot of alignment, but we have a lot of things that are different in our career paths, right?
Yeah.
So let's just dive into you a little bit, man. I mean, what happened? How'd you start? I know you went to college, kind of non-traditional student. Can you tell me about that?
The interesting thing is maybe the more pivot to the entrepreneurial path, right? Because I think it's interesting to look at the course.
Yeah.
Came from a family that we didn't have a lot of people going to college. My mom and dad didn't go the college route. Very hardworking, or rural, rodeo, horses, farm, kind of like you. You grew up in the same facet, right? And then all of a sudden I started thinking about, well, what if college, but sports got me to college, but then maybe some entrepreneurial activities.
Yeah, let's dive into that, right? Because didn't you start throwing parties even in college that kind of turned into a little bit of a business?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, I'm getting my education degree. I have my degree, in history to teach and everything. And I'm going down this path and there's sports and everything. And I'm marking the boxes. I'd be a wildland firefighter in the summer. So super traditional. But I didn't have any money. So I'd burn through my money from firefighting in the summer and I didn't have any money. So then my buddies and I, we basically kind of started throwing parties and we got really, really good at it. And the tough part is that comes with consequences that a school system and maybe your coach don't usually agree with.
But you were becoming an entrepreneur and you didn't even know it was happening, right?
Yeah, isn't it interesting how there's some things nowadays that people were doing back then that they're like, well, that's a waste of time. YouTube, video games. I mean, all these different things that are now entrepreneurial.
Right.
Mine was social functions, I guess you could say.
You were having fun.
No, it was great. At first we were just doing it to have fun, and all of a sudden we're like, hey, we can turn $1 on this, and then all of a sudden we have a bank account, we have a process, a structure, a website, a culture, shirts, gear.
Sure. Makes complete sense.
Yeah, but that led me to a situation that actually completely changed my life because we had a really, really good social function one evening, and it led to larger consequences that were very pivotal in my course as a person. That led me to sitting with a professor named Doc McLean that just passed away, I think 3-4 weeks ago. And there I am seeking advice from this professor, and he, at the time, was drunk. Doc loved to drink. And he just gets ultra upset because I'm sitting there trying to discuss how I can graduate, how I can become a teacher, and this traditional route. And he just kind of lost it on me. And he's like, you're not a traditional person. He's like, the traditional route will drown you. He starts going, he's splashing his whiskey. I'm talking like classic, old school vintage. What is it? Who's the professor off of Animal House?
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So if anybody's seen Animal House, there's a professor on there, right? So he has vinyl records playing, and ultimately he's like, Shane, you will make millions of dollars. You're going to travel the world, and you're going to impact and lead and connect to people. And he's like, and you're not going to accept your degree right now. You're going to go meet a professor tomorrow because we're starting a public relations minor, and you're going to speak to him, and you're not going to graduate this semester, and you're going to stay.
Wow, there you go. So you dove into that. You got through that. Seems like you ended up kind of going down the entrepreneur path. What was the first thing that you ended up with after college?
Well, the tough part with all that knowledge is now I spent all my time having a traditional trajectory. And then you got to push back on that trajectory. Your parents, your family, your friends. I started being like, well, I don't think I want to be a teacher right now. And I don't want to use all this stuff. And they have maybe even being a firefighter, that's cool. And they have a picture in their mind for you that doesn't align with how you're speaking, especially when you don't know what the heck you're going to do. So I started looking, and I created an internship at a concert house, and I pitched it at him, and I was like, dude, I'll work for free. I just want to learn. And I built an internship at a local concert house. And the whole idea is like, dude, if I could get paid to throw parties, that's cool. So I pitched him that I would work for free all the time, whenever, for months on end, because I was thinking I could make really good money doing it.
I gotcha.
Okay.
Yeah. So you ended up working for him for free, but then he ended up saying, you know what, I'm going to pay you because he saw value in you, right?
Yeah, he went to pay me, but then I told him, you can't pay me. Our handshake agreement was you would never pay me. What I really wanted was a 6-figure management job at the concert house, because my buddy was talking about making $100,000. And then that night we're counting money, and I go, hey, man, I turned down him paying me. I'm like, we did a handshake agreement that you're not going to pay me hourly. The next day he offered me a management position. The tough part is it was, not the figures I was thinking.
Sure.
And he told me straight up, he's like, Shane, the only way you're going to make that kind of money is if you're going into sales and building your own business.
Light bulb came on, right?
Yeah, sitting there middle of the night counting money. I think Twista was there. It was a Twista concert, and we were counting the money after a Twista concert.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And I remember I had this buddy talking about doing direct sales, and he's like, we can make 6 figures doing this, but it was so unconventional, and it was door-to-door sales and uncomfortable that I didn't want to even dive into it. And after that, after working for 3 months for free while being a substitute teacher, and then I was also doing sales and sucking, I made no money. So I was making $50 a day driving my beater car to basically make no money for 3-4 months or something.
It happened. So how did you stumble into your first big career opportunity? And then did it start out like a big career opportunity?
No, I mean, kind of like you, I think you stumbled into sales. Was it biologic sales?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in sales my whole life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was my first big kind of break. So one of the big things that I really want to know about you, because you're pretty non-traditional as a person, right? So you had to do a little bit of the grind. I'm a big fan of the grind. I mean, everybody knows that you got to put a lot of hard work in the beginning, and then you got to leverage that hard work to continue to build your business and lifestyle and everything else out, right?
Yeah.
So you worked your ass off, you got shit done, and then you ended up in a position where at some point you recognize, I've been killing it. What did that look like, and how did you realize that you were really kind of at that pivotal moment?
Well, I transitioned the sales world, I guess you could say, opened my eyes to the possibilities of doing something bigger. Because when you do sales and you get that income, you get that endorphin hit, and you see the progress, that can aggressively push you past what you thought you were capable of doing. It really opens up your eyes.
Well, let's get into that just a little bit more. So you probably had somebody at some point in your life say, you know what, Shane, you're doing something amazing. And not pre-doing it. I'm talking about right in the moment. They're like, you're really doing well. And then that opened your eyes to something else. For me, it was really simple. Somebody told me, Chris, you're a CEO. Why don't you call yourself a CEO? And I thought, well, I don't need to do that. I don't want to alienate myself from the people that I'm working with. And what it did was really open up my mind to realizing my full potential, right? And in doing that, I got a lot more respect, and then came more business, then came a different perspective
and your
on my
mind
business.
completely shifted.
Exactly. So tell me when that happened for you, what that was.
I remember a specific moment that I remember a mentor of mine said, well, obviously you're going to be worth $1 million. He's like, it's just how many millions and how life's going to look.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because we were in Santorini. He was like, I was doing good in sales, and he's like, hey man, I was working with a smart home company, Amp Smart, and we're killing it. And he goes, dude, I'm going to fly you, and we're going to go to Europe, and we're going to just talk about entrepreneurialism. In fact, he called me and said, where do you want to go in the world? I want to do a trip. And I couldn't even think big enough, so I said, California. And he's like, no, anywhere in the world. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? He's like,
sure.
Right? So we fly to Greece, and we're on the island of Santorini, and I'm like, I remember I put on the free robe and the free stuff. And he comes out, and I'm drinking coffee, and he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, I'm pretending to be a millionaire, and I'm, my low 20s goofing off. And he goes, and we started having a conversation, and I'm like, yeah, maybe someday. And he's like, no. He's like, Shane, obviously you're going to be a millionaire. The question is how many millions and how's life going to look? And it was so profound because I never had anybody speak to me that way.
But hold up, that's like a millionaire mindset, right? So you get in that position where you're like, I am this, and now all of a sudden you've got an expectation to do that, right? So that's another kind of eye-opening moment, I imagine, right? It's like kind of one of those, moments where you're like, man.
Yeah, I mean, when you
This is
grow
it.
up in a
Yeah.
single wide trailer house, and I remember my parents working their butts off to build an actual house, right? And watching the grind, and my mom working 2 different jobs. We would make her dinner when she came home. She'd have cold macaroni and cheese that we would have to make for her, you know? And for someone to speak to me in a way of like, you will be worth $1 million, it was so alien. You know, you push back on it, but I trusted him. And then I'm like, well, you know, how do you get there? I think I asked, and he's like, well, you know, what book are you reading? And I go, I don't read books. I'm done with college. And he did, And that little he always did when people are pushing back and not listening to his advice.
Right.
And I go, what? And he goes, well, poor people watch TV and wonder why. Rich people, wealthy people read books and know why. And at the time, YouTube wasn't powerful and all that kind of stuff. And it was just implementing that you need to seek knowledge to find this conclusion.
Absolutely. That's a really great kind of takeaway, right? So it's mind opening. And I'm sure when you were on that trip, you know, it was probably paid for by him too, right? So
man. I was like, I don't know, like 23, 24 or something.
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm like,
Yeah.
cool, man, let's go. I wasn't thinking about that. I'm like,
Yeah.
just trying to make some money and hustle.
Yeah, and so one of the big things that I see for young individuals, especially developing, is you got to hustle and you got to find yourself in that right situation where you're with those types of people, right? So
Yeah.
it's the people you surround yourself with, right? And they'll see potential in you if you're driving toward that.
Well,
So-
and if you're in a spot that you're in a place that you can have the conversation, like
Right.
the story you and I
Yeah.
discussed about that guy giving you that advice, you put yourself in the situation where you were working hard, you were being ambitious, you were being healthy, you were healthy enough and focused enough and working hard enough that guy felt your energy, Chris, and then he was willing to offer you advice.
Yep.
'Cause
An
it-
opportunity, right? But
Yeah.
getting into that moment with you is, you know, you're sitting here and you're kind of getting to experience a different lifestyle in a way, right? And
Yeah.
it's kind of funny, you know, in retrospect, but you look at it and you go, man, I never could have dreamed having these types of opportunities.
Oh my gosh! I'm sitting here with my friends, a millionaire. He's traveling us, flying us around the world just to discuss and develop. And at the time, I was just doing direct door-to-door sales. I was just raw direct door-to-door sales, not understanding investments, not understanding asset development. I had no real estate. I had nothing. It was just as raw as can be. And I was so focused on doing it that all I was doing is cash flowing and investing. Right? I wasn't even aware of the assets I was building.
Right. So I really want to talk about that because that's really important, right? Because as you're able to build, you're able to amplify the opportunity, right? And that's
Yeah.
a big part, right? That's why people build so much momentum and really become, you know, wealthy in a way that can be generational at times, right? But I really want to kind of hyper focus in on the concept of you shifting with that mindset shifting and then receiving your first 6-figure check, for instance.
Yeah, that was really interesting because it's just so hard to wrap your mind around it as you're going. Because right now, especially in the world today with depression and anxiety at an all-time high in America, there's all this, there's all these pushbacks, there's all these inferiority bias going on. All of us run into it it's hard to really picture making that. And then it's hard to believe you're actually doing it. Right. And I remember the first time I made $100,000, my buddy called me. We were knocking doors in Compton. I remember specifically the street. I just set this really nice family. And I remember being on the street and he's like, dude, you made $100,000 this year. And I was so focused on working. I was so focused on the process that I couldn't even compute, even though that was my goal that year. You know, that was my goal, very specific goal. I couldn't even fathom what had happened because I wasn't prepared to even think that big. Mm-hmm. I wanted to go that big, but I didn't think it would happen.
Mm-hmm. So now you've got this experience where you're sitting with a guy who tells you, hey, how's that going to look for you? And then that transitions into you actually hitting it.
Yeah.
Right? And then from there, what was the next big milestone for you?
You know, I think after that it was sitting there and understanding asset development. Fear hit me. You know, you go out and you make 6 figures in 4 or 5 months, and then fear hit me. I'm like, oh no, what do? I had no idea what to do. I didn't know what a bond was. I didn't know what a stock was. I didn't know what a Roth was. I didn't know any terminology because I grew up very rural, and it was, hey man, you put money in a mattress, you do a savings account. That was a big thing. You know, my mom's all about saving, and she's an amazing woman. But I didn't know about asset development or what's an S corp, what's an LLC, what taxes. Right? Oh, I'm not going to get a tax check back. So within that, I started like really trying to figure out how to become wealthy, and that was really uncomfortable because I was very, very foreign.
Mm-hmm.
Very foreign.
And there's a certain perception around that, right? For a certain, I guess, socioeconomic class, there's a stigma around being successful, right? That's a little bit inhibitory. At least I've experienced.
Well, you're
that.
made to feel bad for sometimes. It isn't.
It's
you and I have discussed it
self-restrictive more than anything.
Yeah, we've discussed it. Like I don't discuss my income and in aspects about it. Like I remember when I found out I was worth $1 million, and it was so shocking to me. Like I was so focused on working. I was in my low 20s, and I was so focused on just going to work and don't spend the money because this is not a real reality. It's gonna fall apart. It's gonna fall apart. And I'm sitting there with my tax guy because one day I'm just like, I want to be worth $1 million. And so I was fired up. I went in there with some goals. I'm going to do this. And I came in and he's like, you already are.
Find a different goal.
Yeah. He was like, you already are. And I made everything so passive that we were maxing out, whether you're Ross, you're SEP, all the things. Everything was passively. You and I discussed it. I still passively invest my money without looking at it. And I'm like, oh. He's like, yeah, congratulations. And it was interesting, like, okay, now you're worth $1 million and you're in your 20s. What do? You can buy a BMW. You can do a lot of things. And I went a route of not tell anybody. I became very fearful of, well, what if I do this wrong? I don't want people to know. And I had to come up with some new goals.
Best time to break. Ready? All right. So one of the biggest things that I'm really focused on is just giving hardcore advice. But what I mean by that is real, raw, authentic stuff, right? I'm tired of all the bullshit. People are like, just work harder and something will happen. So what is your like straightforward advice to a guy that wants to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah. Well, there's two. It's so interesting. It's like a seesaw, right? There's don't plan too much and take action. And then all of a sudden people turn around, they didn't plan enough. I think some people get frozen with over planning. They're like, oh, I worked 7 hours yesterday, 7 hours today, and they're sitting around just planning, and they plan themselves out and never doing anything because they're so frozen by taking action because they're worried about failure. Anxiety is the fear of unknown. So you don't want to have the fear of failure that freezes you, but then also you don't want to be so blind by just taking action that you turn around, you don't have anything there. So it's that constant check-in. I think taking action and going after it and doing discovery while in motion is the best way to do it.
Right. Like I kind of think back to the Industrial Revolution. You think of the big oil tycoons, right? They're trying to ship oil on the trains, and the guys keep jacking the price up to ship, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, screw it, I'm going to build a pipeline, right? Very foreign. But at that moment, they could have sufficed to the surroundings. They could have said, you know what? This is how this is going to go down. Or they say, how do I pivot out of that? Right? So for me, the biggest advice would be, hey, you know what? We all hit walls. We all make false assumptions. We all make decisions that were the right decision, but we just need to tweak them a little bit to continue forward. So what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think anything's a wrong decision. I think you should forgive yourself and stop dwelling on it and don't call it a wrong decision. Just call it the process. I think psychologically people inhibit themselves. Just do it. Yeah. And then if it was wrong, aka wrong, forgive yourself and then adjust.
Right. The other big thing that I would say in terms of investment in time is don't overplan. You can only do so much planning, and then you have to try to execute. And it's okay if you fail. In fact, failing is a good thing. People need to fail, and I always say, and you probably heard it a million times, but you need to fail into success. Shit will happen if you make shit happen.
Yeah.
Right? Real simple. So anybody for me that I would encourage to become an entrepreneur is say, what is it that you want to do and how do you achieve it, right? And from there, implement it. Don't sit around, don't wait, don't say, I don't know what to do. And if you hit a roadblock, if you get in a situation where you're like, holy crap, I'm in this position where I can't progress, right? I'm doing this, even in sales. Sales is a really easy example of that. I keep trying to sell and I've increased my volume, but my close rate isn't any better.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? You probably need to pivot, look at the process. But that doesn't mean you freeze and plan and plan and plan and plan and plan. You have to implement whatever it is that you're putting in plan.
Yeah, and it's that fine balance.
Yep.
Right? And like you said, and that freezes everybody. There's a lot of people that get frozen nowadays with indecision.
I totally agree. So, as you know, we're going to be just kind of continuing to pump out content. Some of it's going to be with our guests. We want to always have that element. But I think a lot of this, guys, is Shane and I kind of talking about our entrepreneur experience, and just to kind of tease that, Shane's been an entrepreneur in the energy space for a really long time, in marketing and sales as well. I've been in the biotech pharmaceutical space and the marketing and advertising space. I run a marketing advertising company along with a publishing company. So, we have a very diverse background, and we've done a lot of different things in our careers, but all of them are self-supportive in the sense that whether I'm learning in biotechnology, a lot of those skills are transferable as an entrepreneur into multiple different categories. And it's all about opening up and understanding what you're going to be good at it. But you got to remember, you got to pivot out of situations when you know it's not working, and identifying that sooner rather than later, and running quick A/B tests on your process and doing all these things is really critical. But you gotta start somewhere. So start and fail into success. We all appreciate you hopping on. Shane, I appreciate you giving us a little knowledge, dropping
Good flow,
it.
man. Good stuff.
But we're going to continue doing this, guys. So again, I appreciate you guys tuning in to UrbanLink Media Podcast. You can find this on UrbanLink Magazine. And if you're interested in marketing strategies, marketing tips, or you need support with marketing, you can reach out to UrbanLink Media, which is a multimedia digital advertising organization. We do a lot of different things along with business consulting. So if you want to talk to us, we're more than willing to talk to you. I appreciate your time. Have a wonderful afternoon.
I'm ready to play now. Put me in the game now. I came here to prove it. I'm ready to do it. I can't be afraid.